The salt-laden breeze carried the scent of the ocean as Poppy Winters wiped down the weathered wooden counter of shore-line supplies, the small fishing shop she had inherited from her father 3 years ago after his sudden passing. Tucked away in the coastal town of Baybrook, the shop had become her sanctuary, her connection to the father she missed every day and the livelihood that kept her anchored to this sleepy seaside community. The brass bell above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of a customer. Poppy looked up from the tackle display she was organizing, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Good morning," she called out cheerfully. "Let me know if you need any help." The man who entered was unfamiliar, definitely not one of her regulars. Tall with broad shoulders, he wore faded jeans and a simple gray Henley that seemed expensive despite its casual appearance. His dark hair was slightly tousled by the wind, and he had the kind of tan that spoke of outdoor activities rather than beach lounging. "Morning," he replied, his deep voice carrying easily through the small shop. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, scanned the shelves with curiosity. "I could actually use some advice. I'm new to fishing." Poppy smiled, setting aside the fishing lures she'd been arranging. "Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Poppy, by the way, Poppy Winters." "Wade Evans," he replied, extending a hand. His grip was firm but gentle. "Nice to meet you. So what kind of fishing are you interested in? Shore fishing, deep sea? We've got some great spots around here for both." Wade ran a hand through his hair, looking slightly embarrassed. "I'm honestly not sure. I've just bought a place on Lighthouse Point and thought I should learn. When in Rome, right?" Poppy raised her eyebrows. Lighthouse Point was home to some of the most expensive properties in the area, vacation homes for the wealthy who rarely stayed more than a few weeks a year. Lighthouse Point, beautiful area. So you're planning to stick around for a while? That's the plan, he nodded. "I've been living in hotels and temporary accommodations for years because of work. Thought it was time for somewhere that felt like home." There was something in his tone, a hint of loneliness perhaps, that resonated with Poppy. She knew what it was like to feel adrift, even when surrounded by familiar shores. "Well, let's start with the basics then," she said, leading him toward a display of fishing rods. "For a beginner, I'd recommend something versatile." For the next hour, Poppy guided Wade through the essentials, explaining the differences between various types of equipment with the patience and enthusiasm that had earned her shop its loyal customer base. Wade proved to be an attentive student, asking intelligent questions and showing genuine interest in her explanations. "You really know your stuff," he commented as she demonstrated how to tie a particular knot. Poppy smiled. "I grew up in this shop. My dad taught me everything I know." She paused, the familiar ache of loss briefly surfacing. "He passed away 3 years ago." "I'm sorry to hear that," Wade said, and the sincerity in his voice made her look up. "It must be tough running this place on your own." "Some days more than others," she admitted, "but I love it. There's something about helping people connect with the ocean. It makes me feel like I'm carrying on his legacy." Wade nodded, seeming to understand perfectly. By the time he left, he'd purchased more fishing gear than any beginner could possibly need, including a high-end rod that Poppy had ordered specially for a customer who never returned to claim it. "I'm sure I'll be back with questions," he said, as she handed him his receipt. "Maybe you could even show me some good spots sometime, if that's not too forward." Poppy hesitated. She didn't make a habit of taking customers out fishing, but there was something about Wade that felt trustworthy. "I close early on Thursdays. If the weather's good next week, I could show you some basics." His face brightened with a genuine smile. "That would be great. I'll stop by on Thursday then." After Wade left, Poppy returned to organizing her inventory, trying to ignore the flutter of excitement she felt about their upcoming fishing lesson. It had been a long time since she'd looked forward to spending time with someone new. True to his word, Wade returned the following Thursday just as Poppy was flipping the sign from open to closed. She had changed from her work clothes into a comfortable pair of jeans and a light sweater, her hair pulled back into a practical ponytail. "Ready for your first fishing lesson?" she asked as he entered the shop. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied with a grin that transformed his serious face. I've been practicing those knots you showed me, by the way. Impressive dedication, Poppy laughed. We'll head to Pelican Cove. It's quiet this time of year, and the fish tend to bite even for beginners. The drive to the cove was short, with Wade following Poppy's weathered blue pickup in a sleek black Range Rover that looked brand new. As they unloaded their gear, Poppy couldn't help noticing the contrast between her well-worn equipment and the pristine items Wade had purchased from her shop. "So what brings you to Baybrook?" she asked as they made their way down to a secluded spot on the shore. "It's not exactly a bustling metropolis." Wade set down his tackle box, gazing out at the horizon where the setting sun painted the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. "That's exactly why I chose it. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere real." He glanced at her. "I run a shipping company, Evans Maritime. It's grown significantly over the years." Poppy paused in the middle of setting up her rod. Evans Maritime was no small operation. It was one of the largest shipping companies on the East Coast. She'd seen their vessels pass through the harbor countless times. "Wow, that's impressive," she said, trying to reconcile the down-to-earth man beside her with the CEO of such a massive corporation. Wade shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "It keeps me busy, too busy, probably. That's why I decided to buy the place here, force myself to slow down occasionally." As they settled into fishing, Poppy found herself relaxing in Wade's company. Despite his obvious wealth and success, he was refreshingly unpretentious, laughing at himself when he tangled his line and listening attentively to her instructions. "My dad always said fishing teaches patience better than any teacher could," she shared as they sat side by side, lines cast into the gentle waves. "Smart man," Wade replied. "In my business, everything is about efficiency and speed. This is peaceful. I can see why you love it." The evening passed quickly, with Wade catching a modest-sized bass that he insisted on releasing after Poppy showed him how to remove the hook properly. "The first catch is always special," she said, watching the fish dart away, "even if it's not a keeper." As the light faded, they packed up their gear, and Wade insisted on helping Poppy load hers into her truck. "I had a great time," he told her as they prepared to leave. "Maybe we could do this again." Poppy found herself nodding before she could overthink it. "I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, their fishing outings became a regular Thursday ritual. Each time, Poppy discovered something new about Wade, how he'd built his company from a single cargo ship inherited from his grandfather, his passion for marine conservation, his dry sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable. She found herself looking forward to their time together, even as she tried to remind herself that a man like Wade would eventually return to his real life. One Thursday in late April, as they were packing up after a particularly successful fishing trip, Wade hesitated beside her truck. "Poppy, I was wondering if you might like to have dinner with me tomorrow night, not as fishing buddies, but as a date." Poppy's heart skipped a beat, but uncertainty quickly followed. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd never outgrown. "I'm not sure that's a good idea." His expression fell slightly, but he nodded. "Can I ask why?" She gestured vaguely between them. "We're from different worlds. You run a multi-million-dollar company. I struggle to keep my dad's little shop afloat sometimes. I'm just being realistic." "Is that what you think matters to me?" Wade asked, his voice gentle but firm. "Poppy, I've dated women who fit perfectly into my world, as you call it, women who cared more about my bank account than who I am. These past few weeks with you have been the most genuine connection I've had with anyone in years." His sincerity was impossible to doubt, and Poppy felt her resistance wavering. "I don't even own a dress fancy enough for wherever you probably take dates," she attempted to joke. Wade smiled. "Then how about this? I'll cook for you at my place. Nothing fancy, just dinner." "You cook?" she asked, surprised. "Another skill I picked up living alone. I make a pretty impressive grilled salmon." Poppy couldn't help but smile. "All right, dinner at your place, but I'm bringing dessert." The following evening, Poppy drove up the winding road to Lighthouse Point. following Wade's directions to a modern glass and cedar home perched on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. Despite her attempt to stay calm, she felt distinctly out of her element as she parked her old truck next to Wade's Range Rover. She had spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing her outfit, settling finally on a simple emerald green dress she'd worn to her cousin's wedding the previous year. It wasn't designer, but it was the nicest thing she owned, and she'd been told the color complemented her auburn hair and green eyes. Wade opened the door before she could knock, looking handsome in dark jeans and a navy button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said, and there was an appreciative warmth in his gaze that made her cheeks flush. "Thank you," she replied, holding out the container in her hands. "I brought apple pie. It's my grandmother's recipe." "Perfect," he smiled, ushering her inside. The interior of the house was stunning but surprisingly comfortable, open spaces filled with natural light, comfortable furniture in neutral tones, and large windows that showcased the breathtaking ocean view. It was luxurious without being ostentatious. "This place is amazing," Poppy said honestly as he led her through to a spacious kitchen where delicious aromas wafted from the stove. "It's finally starting to feel like home," Wade replied, taking 2 glasses from a cabinet. "Wine." Dinner was indeed impressive, perfectly grilled salmon with roasted vegetables, and a risotto that Poppy had to admit was better than any she'd tasted at Baybrook's few restaurants. What surprised her most, however, was how comfortable she felt. Away from the shop and their fishing spots, she'd worried things might be awkward. But conversation flowed as easily as it always had between them. After dinner, they moved to the deck with glasses of wine. The night was clear, with stars scattered across the sky and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below. "Can I ask you something?" Poppy said after a comfortable silence. "Anything." "Why fishing? Of all the hobbies you could have picked up, why that?" Wade considered the question, swirling the wine in his glass. "My grandfather used to take me when I was young, before he got too busy with the company. They're some of my happiest memories." He glanced at her. "When I bought this place, I thought about those times, how simple and peaceful they were. I wanted to recapture that feeling, and have you?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said, his eyes meeting hers, "but not just because of the fishing." The implication hung in the air between them. Slowly, Wade reached across the space separating them, his fingers brushing against hers. Poppy didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand, allowing her fingers to intertwine with his. "I'm glad you wandered into my shop that day," she admitted. "So am I," Wade replied, his voice low. "Even if I did spend way too much on fishing gear," Poppy laughed. "You were supporting a local business. Very noble of you," Wade smiled, but then his expression grew more serious. "Poppy, I know you have concerns about our differences, but I want you to know that what I feel for you is real. It has nothing to do with our backgrounds or what we do for a living." "I believe you," she said, and she was surprised to realize she truly did. "I'm just not used to any of it." She gestured around at the luxurious home. "I've spent my whole life in Baybrook running that shop, never really looking beyond the horizon. And I've spent too much of mine focusing on nothing but the horizon," Wade replied. "Always the next deal, the next expansion, never appreciating what was right in front of me." He squeezed her hand gently. "Until now." The kiss that followed was tender and questioning at first, then deeper as Poppy responded, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally pulled apart, she felt slightly breathless. "I should probably go," she said reluctantly, aware of how easy it would be to get carried away. Wade nodded, respecting her boundaries. "I'll walk you to your car." At her truck, he kissed her once more, sweetly. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" Poppy smiled. "I close at 6. Over the next couple of months, their relationship deepened as spring turned to summer. Wade became a familiar figure at Shoreline Supplies, sometimes helping Poppy with deliveries or simply keeping her company during slow periods. They spent evenings fishing, exploring the coastline, or enjoying quiet dinners either at his home or the small cottage Poppy had inherited along with the shop. What impressed Poppy most was how Wade never tried to change her life or overwhelm her with grand gestures. When he learned the shop's air conditioning was failing during a particularly hot week in June, he didn't offer to buy her a new system instead. He showed up with a portable unit and helped her install it, understanding her pride in maintaining the business herself. It was Wade who first brought up the idea of meeting each other's friends and family. "My sister Megan is coming to visit next weekend," he mentioned one evening as they sat on Poppy's small porch, watching fireflies dance in her garden. "She's dying to meet you. I may have talked about you." "A lot," Poppy smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "I'd love to meet her." She hesitated before adding, "And maybe it's time you met my mom. She's been asking about that handsome customer who keeps stealing my daughter away on Thursdays." Wade laughed. "Definitely. Should I be nervous?" "Terrified?" Poppy teased. "She's already planning our wedding." Wade's arm tightened around her. "Is she now?" Poppy blushed, realizing what she'd implied. "I just meant, you know how moms can be." Wade smiled but didn't pursue the topic, leaving Poppy to wonder if the thought of a future together had crossed his mind too. Meeting Megan, Evans proved to be less intimidating than Poppy had feared. Wade's younger sister was warm and unpretentious, with the same blue eyes as her brother but a more outgoing personality. "I've never seen him this happy," Megan told Poppy when Wade stepped away to take a business call during their dinner at his home. "Not even when the company landed that huge European contract last year, and that was supposedly his crowning achievement." Poppy smiled, watching Wade through the window as he paced on the deck, phone to his ear. "He works too hard." "Tell me about it," Megan agreed. "But he's been delegating more since he met you." The executive team nearly had a collective heart attack when he announced he'd be working remotely from Baybrook 3 days a week. This was news to Poppy. Wade had been spending more time in town, but she'd assumed he was simply taking time off. The idea that he was restructuring his work life to be near her was both touching and slightly alarming. Later that night, after Megan had retired to the guest room, Poppy brought it up. "You didn't tell me you were working remotely now." Wade looked slightly embarrassed. "I was going to. I just didn't want you to think I was making too big a change too quickly." "Wade, your company headquarters is in Boston. That's a 3-hour drive. 3 hours and 20 minutes, he corrected with a smile, "and worth every minute." He took her hands in his. "Poppy, I've spent years prioritizing work over everything else. It took meeting you to realize what I was missing. But your company is doing fine. Better than fine. It turns out I have some very capable executives who are thriving with more responsibility." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her palm. "Besides, technology is amazing these days. I can run most things from here, and when I do need to be in Boston, it's not that far." Poppy was touched by his willingness to adapt his life for their relationship, even as a small part of her worried about the day he might grow tired of their quiet life in Baybrook. The following weekend, it was Wade's turn to be nervous as they prepared to have dinner with Poppy's mother, Helen Winters, a retired schoolteacher who lived in a cozy house just a few blocks from the fishing shop. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad," Poppy teased as they walked up the path to her mother's front door. "I haven't met a girlfriend's mother in." "Actually, I'm not sure I ever have," Wade admitted, "at least not in any situation where it mattered this much." Poppy's heart warmed at his words. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. "She's going to love you, just don't let her challenge you to Scrabble. She's ruthless." Helen Winters turned out to be a lively woman in her 60s with Poppy's green eyes and quick smile. She welcomed Wade warmly, though Poppy could see her mother assessing him with the shrewd gaze that had intimidated generations of middle schoolers. "So you're the man who finally got my daughter to take a day off," Helen said as they settled in the living room with glasses of iced tea. "The shop has been her whole life since Patrick passed." "Mom," Poppy protested gently. "It's true, dear," Helen replied unapologetically. "Your father would be thrilled to see you finding balance. He always worried you'd inherit his workaholic tendencies." Wade smiled. "We might both be guilty of that, but we're learning." Dinner was a success, with Helen sharing embarrassing stories from Poppy's childhood and Wade charming her with his genuine interest in her former teaching career and her current volunteer work at the local library. "He's a keeper," Helen declared to Poppy as they cleared the dishes while Wade took a brief call outside. "And not because of his money." "Mom," Poppy exclaimed, mortified. "Oh, please, I may be retired, but I'm not out of touch. I recognized his name." Evans Maritime is mentioned in the business section of the newspaper regularly. Helen handed Poppy a plate to dry, but what matters is how he looks at you, like you hung the moon and stars. Poppy glanced out the window where Wade was finishing his call, his face lighting up when he caught her watching. "I think I'm falling in love with him, Mom," Helen smiled. "I think you already have, sweetheart." As summer progressed, Poppy and Wade fell into a comfortable rhythm, balancing their individual responsibilities with their growing relationship. Wade kept his promise about working remotely most of the time, though he occasionally had to travel to Boston or overseas for important meetings. During those times, Poppy found herself missing him more than she would have thought possible just a few months earlier. The challenges of their different lifestyles arose occasionally. When Wade was invited to a charity gala in Boston and asked Poppy to accompany him, she spent days worrying about fitting in with his sophisticated colleagues. The evening itself turned out to be less intimidating than she'd feared, especially with Wade proudly introducing her to everyone they met. But Poppy couldn't help noticing the curious glances when people learned she ran a small fishing supply shop in a coastal town few of them had heard of. "Does it bother you?" she asked Wade on the drive back to Baybrook the following day. "The way some of them looked at me, like they were wondering what you saw in me." Wade frowned, taking his eyes off the road for a moment to glance at her. "First of all, no. And second, if anyone was looking at you that way, which I doubt, they're not people whose opinions I value." He reached across to take her hand. "Poppy, you were the most genuine person in that entire ballroom. Do you know how refreshing that is in my world?" His words reassured her, and as the weeks passed, Poppy's confidence in their relationship grew. By late August, Wade had become such a fixture in Baybrook that locals no longer did double takes when they saw the CEO of Evans Maritime helping out at Shore Line Supplies or having lunch at the small diner on Main Street. The real test came in September when a major storm hit the coast. Poppy woke at dawn to warnings about potential flooding in the lower part of town where her shop was located. She dressed hurriedly, intending to get to the store and move as much inventory as possible to higher shelves. When she opened her front door, she was surprised to find Wade's Range Rover already pulling into her driveway. "I heard the warning," he explained as he got out, already dressed in work clothes and rain gear. "I thought you might need help at the shop." Together, they raced to Shore Line Supplies, arriving to find water already seeping under the front door. For the next several hours, they worked tirelessly alongside several of Poppy's regular customers who had shown up to help, moving merchandise to safety and setting up sandbags. Despite their efforts, by afternoon the water was knee-deep inside the shop, and all they could do was retreat and wait for the storm to pass. Poppy stood on higher ground, watching the water rise around the building that had been her family's livelihood for 2 generations. "It's going to be okay," Wade said, his arm around her shoulders. "The structure is sound. Once the water recedes, we'll clean up and reopen." Poppy leaned into him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "The insurance won't cover all of it." "We've been struggling with premiums the last few years." Wade was quiet for a moment. "Let me help." She stiffened slightly. "Wade, not as a handout," he clarified quickly. "As a business partner if you want, or a loan, whatever makes you comfortable. But please don't let pride stop you from accepting help when you need it." Poppy looked up at him, rain streaming down both their faces. "A partner? I've been thinking about it anyway," he admitted. "Your knowledge combined with some capital investment could turn Shore Line into something even more special, but only if that's something you'd want." Instead of answering immediately, Poppy rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, not caring that they were both soaking wet and standing in the middle of a storm-ravaged street. "I love you," she said when they broke apart, the words she'd been feeling for weeks finally spoken aloud. Wade's face transformed with joy. I love you too, Poppy, more than I thought possible. The cleanup after the storm took weeks, but true to Wade's word, they turned it into an opportunity. With Poppy's expertise and Wade's business acumen and investment, they expanded shoreline supplies into a more comprehensive outfitter, adding a section for kayak and paddleboard rentals that had always been Poppy's dream. Through it all, Wade was careful to let Poppy maintain control of the business decisions, offering advice when asked but never overstepping or trying to take over. It was this respect for her independence that cemented Poppy's certainty that their relationship, despite its unlikely beginning, was built to last. On a crisp October evening, 6 months after Wade had first walked into her shop, he suggested they go fishing at Pelican Cove. For old time's sake, he said with a smile that hinted at something more. The cove was beautiful at sunset, the autumn light casting a golden glow over the water. They didn't catch much, but Poppy hardly noticed, content to be sharing this peaceful moment with the man she loved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Wade set down his fishing rod and turned to her. Poppy Winters, he said, taking both her hands in his. The day I walked into your shop looking for fishing gear, I had no idea I was about to find something infinitely more valuable. Poppy's heart began to race as Wade reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I know it hasn't been that long, he continued, but when you know, and I know that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. He opened the box to reveal a stunning yet tasteful engagement ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. Will you marry me? Tears filled Poppy's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, and as they kissed with the waves lapping at the shore beside them, Poppy marveled at how life could change so completely in just a few months. They married the following spring in a ceremony on the beach, with Helen Winters and Megan Evans both crying happy tears as the couple exchanged vows with the ocean as their backdrop. The reception was held at Wade's home, now their home on Lighthouse Point, where locals mingled with Wade's business associates in a celebration that perfectly represented their blended lives. A year after their wedding, Shoreline Supplies had expanded to a second location in a neighboring town, with plans for a third focusing on ecotourism and conservation education, a passion project for both Poppy and Wade. On their first anniversary, they sat on their deck watching the sunset, just as they had on their first date. Any regrets? Wade asked, his arm around his wife as she leaned against his chest. Poppy smiled, her hand resting on the slight swell of her stomach where their first child was growing. Not a single one. Only that I didn't need more fishing gear sooner, he replied with a grin, pressing a kiss to her temple. As night fell over the ocean, Poppy reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter in a small fishing shop to building a life together, it had been unexpected in every way. Yet somehow, like the steady pull of the tide, it felt like they had always been destined to find each other on this particular shore.